So, the world is in a life and death struggle between communism and democracy, between freedom and tyranny. And this struggle is nothing new. In fact, it's been plaguing us since the dawn of time. I talk a lot about China, or the CCP to be specific, and folks are always asking, what about the NWO, or the UN, or the Rothschilds, or the Zionists? Isn't China just another boogeyman? Well, perhaps, but today I'm going to show you why I believe the CCP is Frankenstein's monster, how it's gone totally rogue, and how it's going to bring down the entire globalist New World Order along with itself. Find out how in today's show. Welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. It's great to be here. It's been a little while since I've done a live show because I've been traveling, but today is a very important show. And there's a handful of reasons why it's important, but I think the biggest one is because for us folks here in America, and especially beyond America, looking at Australia, the UK, what's happening all over the world. Even if 2 years ago you would have said, the whole New World Order thing is a conspiracy and there's no validity to it, and go put your tinfoil hat on. I think that most of us in the world now can see that there's something going on. There is some sort of bigger plan that has been architected and it's being implemented across the world. And I think that most of us can see that what it's taking us towards is what they refer to as the Great Reset, a basically a global communist system using under the guise of medical tyranny. So, if you've been studying that for a while, say you've been reading, the Agenda 2021, Agenda 2030, the Lockstep report, so many of these things that you research, they point to this certain group of people. There's different names for them. They call them the cabal, the deep state. I'll refer to them as the globalists for the sake of just easy conversation throughout this show. And these globalists have been working for centuries, if not millennia, towards a plan to bring the entire world under what they would like to call their new world order, a centralized one world government. You could look at it from that one world religion, and basically turn everything into a system of basically everyone is slaves. You have the useless eaters, the whatever you want to call them down here, and you have these elites up top. These very very small number of elites. And however, though, as China has risen in strength, um, I think that they're playing a very unique role as it relates to that. And so, what I want to do in this show is look at who's really in charge. Because a lot of people, I talk about the CCP, I talk about China, and people say, but it's the Rothschilds, it's the Zionists, it's all these people. But fundamentally, who's in control of this? Because I believe that what's happening at these high levels is a lot of infighting and a power struggle. And I think that the best way to illustrate that is there's a very old Chinese saying that there's a few different ways you could say it, but basically what it says is that one mountain is not big enough for two tigers, meaning that there can only be one real leader. And if you think that Xi Jinping, if you think that the communists in China are going to bow down to the European bankers, you don't know the Chinese very well, especially the CCP. And if but I so what are we looking into is what's happening? How's this power playing out? Why is Soros calling out Xi Jinping? Why is Xi Jinping and the state-run media in China going after Soros? Because there's certainly some fighting going on, and I want to look into that. But I first want to start at looking into the origin of the Chinese Communist Party. I'm not going to be diving into very much the origin of the globalists. I mean, that would probably take me a 30-hour episode to go into the different families and everything for the past, 6,000 years or more. So in today's show, I'm going to be looking at the globalists and how they basically got China started, and how China wasn't just the forming, not China, the CCP, and how the forming of the CCP wasn't some random occurrence. It was something that was very, very deliberate. Even Mao himself, you may not know this, but Mao Zedong, so he was really the person that established the main force of the Chinese Communist Party, was actually Yale educated. So I'm going to be digging into these things. But first, I want to look at a particular article that goes into some of the facts about the origin of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, I'll say one thing. A lot of times I'll find different information to use. I don't always agree with that information in its entirety. So this article frames things a lot as the Jewish doing this, the Jewish doing that. So there's a lot of people that are saying, "Oh, it's the Jewish," and I don't get into that because I believe that there is a group of evil people that aren't any particular religion. If there's any religion they are, it's Satanism or Luciferianism. But they've infiltrated religions around the world. So to say that it's to point fingers at the Jews, I think is inaccurate. It's like saying that the Christians are bad or this is bad because there's evil people that have infiltrated all the religions around the world and they've hidden behind those religions. So again, I'll show you this article, but I will replace the word the Jewish with the globalist because I think that is the more accurate way of putting it. So looking at this article here, we've got communist China was created by globalist infiltrators working for the international banking cartel. And so this was just looking at a few facts that I wanted to share with you how communist China was created by the globalists and it's how it serves their interests. There's a few things here talking about how it ties into the Rothschilds and their agents. So on October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong declared the founding of the People's Republic of China in Tiananmen Square, Beijing. He was funded by Rothschild created communism in Russia, which if you look into the origins of communism in Russia, the Soviet Union, you can see that so much of that points back to the European bankers. Same with Hitler in Germany. So basically, what they're saying is that he was funded by the Rothschild created communism in Russia and also the following Rothschild agents Solomon Adler, a former United States Treasury official who was a Soviet spy, Israel Epstein, the son of a Jewish Bolshevik imprisoned by the Tsar in Russia for trying to ferment a revolution there, and Frank Coe, a leading official of the Rothschild IMF basically saying that these are all Jewish people, okay, but they were behind the rise to power of Mao Zedong, the communist dictator of China, who, as you know, and I certainly know, that had tortured and killed tens of millions of Chinese. They're saying mostly Christians, but a lot of them were of all beliefs. They're Buddhist, Muslims, Falun Gong, Christians during his brutal reign. So this article, I'm not going to dig into the details of that particular article, but it does provide a lot of interesting information about how a lot of the initial funding and support and backing of the basically of Mao into forming the Chinese Communist Party was coming from these particular families. Now, something that's also really interesting is if you look into Mao Zedong himself and his education. I want to show you an article here, which is very interesting. Okay, so this is something that Yale Group spurs Mao's emergence. So this is an incredible article I came across that shows how Mao basically got so much of his beginning, so much of how he started was coming through support from Yale within China. So I'm not going to read the whole article, but I'll read a few points. It says that William F. Buckley was not the only Yale figure connected with the presidential trip to China. Without Yale's support, Mao Zedong may have never risen from obscurity to command China. So what it says here is the professor noted in 1990, Mao, age 26, was in Changsha having finished his middle school education. He visited Peking, where he received his serious introduction to the communist theory in Li Taochao's Marxist study group. So he was then raised up to become the editor of the Yale Journal. But what you can see is that with this, that it was through the Yale schools that were at that time they had a China Yale program basically, where it's called Yale in China, where they were allowing people in China to study Yale education. I'll talk a little bit about some of the background of Yale, but what he was saying though is that it was through Yale in the Yale study groups that Mao was introduced to Marxism, basically. And so he was introduced to Marxism, but then he said that now, if he was to develop a reputation in socialist circles, he had to find a forum to propagate his views. At this crucial point, the Student Union of Yale in China invited Mao to take over editorship of their journal. Mao accepted the position and changed the format of the student magazine. It would now deal with social criticism and current problems that focus on thought reorientation. Communism 101. So it goes into further how it was through the becoming an editor for this Yale journal that Mao really started to influence people and start to a lot of the early movement of Marxism in China. Now, Yale, I'm not going to go heavy into Yale, but if you look into Yale, you have the Skull and Bones, you have a lot of the Bushes, Carey that were Yale graduates. So a lot of the control that's coming from the globalists have come through these Ivy League schools, Yale, Harvard, etc. Which so I believe that basically what had happened and what's kind of continue to happening up until really when Trump got in is that the globalists had a lot of control over America, and America had become one of their biggest tools to look at the wars we've waged in the Middle East, look at what's happened in South America, look at what's happened in Vietnam, and especially China. So the America became a tool of the globalists. They had really almost since the founding of our country been infiltrating and controlling. And I think you'd be surprised at how many of our presidents had actually been plucked in and placed in by the globalists. And I think, again, this is why President Trump was such a threat to them because they didn't control him, they didn't own him. A quick side note, because I forgot to do this at the beginning. If you want to follow me on social media, I highly recommend you follow me on Telegram. I'm on there as Man in America. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also find me on Rumble, where I'm going live on Rumble as well. So I'd recommend that because again, I'm on YouTube because it's allowing me to reach more people, which I think is the key of this information war right now. I have other formats where I do things in an uncensored format, but make sure you're subscribed wherever you are. And just so you know, at the very end of the show, once I finish the information part, I'm going to be doing a live question and answer over on Rise TV. So for those of you who don't know Rise TV is basically what I like to call the non-satanic version of Netflix. It's a patriot-owned streaming platform. I happen to be one of those patriots that's part of it, and it's something that we're doing that allows us to keep going. So I put out a lot of free content here. That's my goal. I will always keep doing that for folks who want to support me, for folks who want to get a little more access and have some more intimate discussions. Rise, you can join Rise TV. If you want to check it out, there's a free trial in the description below the video, so you can go click on the link for a free trial, check it out. If you come over for the Q&A and choose to leave afterwards and cancel, I'm not going to be offended. I understand, I do it all the time. So anyway, just a few kind of housekeeping notes for you before I dive back in. Okay, so now talking about Mao, we can see that it's clear that a lot of Mao's origins, that Mao was basically being groomed to be the person that would bring communism into China, right? Similar to what happened with Stalin in Russia and what happened all over. The globalists had their way of putting key people into positions, and a lot of this was coming through their control over the United States, the Council of Foreign Affairs, CFR, the Trilateral Commission, Kissinger. They had a way of placing their people around the world to bring in their system because they knew that they could use America and its military power, its economic power to as a like I said as a tool to implement their global influence around the world. And then when the time would come, they would then have to basically bring America to its knees to fully implement their basically their one world order, their new world order, their one world government, whatever you want to call it. Now, when Trump got in 2016, as I mentioned, he really kiboshed that plan and really screwed things up for them, which ties into a lot of what's happening now. So getting back to what we saw with Mao in China, there's a few of the things that also show you, without getting into too many of the details, the support that China had, especially the support that communism had in China from these globalists. So the next article I want to show you, this is actually an article that David Rockefeller published in the New York Times in 1973. This is when he was, I believe, the chairman of Chase Bank. So just I'm going to read a few paragraphs in this, but look at this. This is very eye-opening for people that don't say that there's some sort of conspiracy happening, say, why you talk about the Rockefellers or just oil people? Well, why would you say this in the New York Times? So this was published again, as I said, in 1973 written by David Rockefeller, who says, Given China's vastness, it was only due to the remarkable thoughtfulness of our host, because he went on a tour of China in the 70s, um, that the 6 members of our Chase group were able to see and experience so much during just 10 days in Peking, Xi'an, Shanghai, and Canton. In terms of a similar geographic expanse, a week and a half visit to China is something equivalent to trying to see New York City in less than 1.5 minutes. Anyway, he goes on to praise them. One is impressed immediately by the sense of national harmony from the loud patriotic music at the border onward. This is a very real and pervasive dedication to Chairman Mao and Maoist principles. Is it? He says that there's real dedication. Are you sure it's not a forced dedication? Now, listen to this. Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high morale and community of purpose. Okay, sure. Now, last paragraph here. This is what does it for me. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. How extensively China opens up and how the world interprets and reacts to the social innovations and lifestyles she has developed is certain to have a profound impact on the future of many nations. So let me read that one more time. This is Rockefeller in the 70s saying, the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. Really? One of the most important and successful in human history? The social experiment in China that has killed over 100 million people? Like, so this has to get the hairs on the back of your neck to stand up because there is no way anybody can justify what's happened in China unless they are part of some sort of evil, diabolical plan to eliminate large portions of the human race. How can you be praising Mao for his social experiment? Right? So this is again, this is just kind of framing the story here because what I want to talk about is that again, as I mentioned, everyone's saying, "Well, why are you talking about China? It's actually the globalists." And yes, I believe that the globalists got China started. They're the ones that funded it. They're the ones that implemented the ideology. And if you dig into this more, you can see there's a lot more support that they've given. Just like how Hitler in World War II was being supported by people like the Ford Corporation, he was being supported by Boeing. So you have a lot of these big organizations, the ones that are now on the forefront of supporting BLM and a lot of those Marxist ideologies. You have these big organizations that have been supporting and funding these enemies of freedom, let alone being enemies of America. And so China was certainly one of those. But I think that what's happened, and we're going to dig into this together, is that China became too powerful. And I like to refer to the CCP as Frankenstein's monster, because that's what it is. Frankenstein, he built this monster, didn't really know what to expect, tried his best to do something, the monster became too powerful and wreaked havoc. And that's exactly what I believe is happening here. So now what's interesting though now is that you're starting to see these cracks develop. Back in the 90s, when the Clinton was going over and Kissinger and they're opening up China, we had Dao Xiaoping in charge of China. There was this economic opening happening, and the whole world was praising it, and the whole world was rushing to China for these opportunities to make money. Now, things up until Trump, that was how it was under what was the Bushes or Obama, especially under Obama. So many gifts were given to China. So when Trump got in 2016, he became a thorn in China's side completely. But there's other narratives that also started changing because, say, in the 90s, early 2000s, all the globalists, by and large, were very in support of China. But even that's not happening anymore, and that's the tide is turning. So another article I want to show here, this is interesting. So this was back in early of last year that George Soros came out and said that Xi Jinping is the most dangerous to free societies. This is very interesting that you have George Soros coming out saying that Xi Jinping is the most dangerous to free societies. Now, we know that I'm not going to dig into Soros very much, but we know that Soros has been one of the biggest weapons of the globalists, through his Open Societies Foundation. I'll come back to this article, but through his Open Societies Foundation, through a lot of his initiatives, even look at the funding behind BLM, that Soros has been a major tool to bring in a global system and to tear apart real democracies around the world. And 5 years ago, you would have thought, okay, wow, okay, Soros is probably working hand in hand with China, and together they have this plan that they're going to take over the world together. That's really what you would see unfolding if you're looking at things. But why then last year is Soros coming out and saying that Xi Jinping is the most dangerous to free societies? So he says more. It says in this article, this is on BBC, the billionaire philanthropist George Soros has used his annual speech at the World Economic Forum, which is interesting that he did this at Davos at the WEF event, which is very interesting that that's exactly where he chose to make this speech. He said to launch a scathing attack on China and its President Xi Jinping. Mr. Soros warned that artificial intelligence and machine learning could be used to entrench totalitarian control in the country. He said the scenario is presented in unprecedented danger. He also said the Chinese people were his main source of hope, which is interesting. But he said that China is not the only authoritarian regime in the world, but it is the wealthiest, strongest, and technologically most advanced. He then said that this makes Xi Jinping the most dangerous opponent of open societies. Okay, so again, why would Soros be coming out and saying that Xi Jinping is the most dangerous opponent of free societies and open societies? To me, that beg a lot of questions start going off in my mind. Um, could it be perhaps that after Mao, after the change of leadership, after Zhang Zaman, that maybe Xi Jinping has perhaps gone rogue, and he said, "Well, you guys have built me up so well. I've got all this power now. So now who's going to control me?" And do you really think that Xi Jinping will be bowing down to the European bankers? Well, we're going to take a look at that. So this was just the beginning, though. So George Soros, that was last year that he's coming out calling out Xi Jinping. So then that was not so. Aside from that, though, here he is. This is this year. So over the past month or so, George Soros has written multiple op-eds criticizing Xi Jinping. So here we see this is in Fin News Asia, it's a financial news website in Asia. George Soros launches media offensive against China's president. It says billionaire investor George Soros has been on a media offensive in the past few weeks with scathing criticism against China's President Xi Jinping and a warning to the world's largest asset manager. In just a matter of weeks, billionaire founder and chair of Soros Fund Management and Open Society Foundations, George Soros delivered 3 op-ed pieces criticizing China's current leader, his impact on markets and financial firms facilitating foreign investments in the country. So scroll down at this next article. But basically he's come out really strong warning the world of China. So he's already warning about how they're a danger to open societies, especially because of their financial prowess, their financial strength. But now he's warning people financially. And so BlackRock recently did a massive investment opening up, I think it was private mutual funds to the Chinese society, Chinese people to invest in. And Soros spoke out very heavily against that, which is interesting because BlackRock controls basically most of the money in the world between BlackRock and Vanguard. So again, here's one of the articles I can show you. Xi's dictatorship threatens the Chinese state. This is a opinion piece he published in the Wall Street Journal, and this was recently he published this. This is August 13th, and he says, in his quest for personal power, he's rejected Deng Xiaoping's economic reform path and turned the Communist Party into assemblage of yes men. And so while under Deng Xiaoping, or this is more Clinton era, China opened up immensely to the West economically. There were all these different promises of how China was moving towards more of a capitalist society. Here, Soros is really calling out the fact that it was all a ruse, and that what Xi Jinping is doing is basically he's having state-run capitalism, where if you look at how things work, people are investing in China because it's a capitalist opportunity, but behind the scenes, it's really some form of mutated communist fascist system where all the big companies are state run, state owned. Xi Jinping has full control over the major companies in China. Yet these companies are listed public on the stock markets. You have major US firms investing in them. So the whole situation has become really frightening. But again, why is Soros, which you see that Soros is oftentimes the one of the main public mouthpieces of the globalists, right? So you don't see the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds coming out very much. A lot of times they're too hidden behind the scenes. And even a lot of the other families that you may not know about that are hidden and behind the scenes. So Soros is one of the more public figures. The fact that you and I know who he is tells you that he's been chosen to be a public figure and a public influencer that's setting the agenda. You see, recently he had a picture with his son, Nancy Pelosi, right? So Soros is very involved in what's happening within the United States. So why is Soros becoming the mouthpiece that's criticizing China, criticizing the CCP? There's definitely something up with this. Now, it's not just Soros criticizing China, though. It's China criticizing Soros. Now, this is interesting here that China has come out in one of their state run media and said that Soros is the son of Satan. I'm not kidding. So it says the rich and powerful frequently collect enemies on their climb to the top, but billionaire George Soros seems to have more than his share of haters. As part of an ongoing tit for tat, a Chinese media labeled him the son of Satan. So this is really that is a strong stance. Now, here it's talking about Soros says in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal headline BlackRock's China blunder. Soros criticized BlackRock. Soros warned the Western investors by accusing China's President Xi Jinping of carrying out the socialist agenda of nationalizing the private sector by turning all of China's companies into instruments of the state, as I mentioned. Now, the People's Republic of China, the PRC, responded harshly to the billionaire's accusation. The PRC controlled media, the Global Times, which keep in mind that when they say that it's a Chinese controlled government media, that means that nothing gets said unless it's exactly what the CCP wants to be said. So the Global Times published an op-ed titled "The Global Economic Terrorist is Staring at China." That's on September 4th, naming Soros as the culprit. The article accused Soros of providing finance to Hong Kong's jailed newspaper owner Jimmy Lai to support the city's anti-Beijing protests in 2019. The article claimed his motivation was sour grapes over dumping investments in China that later proved to be enormously lucrative. The op-ed also described Soros as the most evil person in the world and the son of Satan. That is really, really strange and intense. It's one thing to say that this guy is an evil capitalist. It's one thing to say that this guy is even a financial terrorist. But for a Chinese state media to come out and tell people that Soros is the most evil person in the world and that he's the son of Satan, that's a strong statement. Now, there's people that that have really hated on Soros, and I think rightfully so over the years. But and I'll get into this a little bit, but if you were to ask me who is the most evil right now on earth, I would certainly say it's the Chinese Communist Party. I spent over 10 years really focused on a lot of the human rights abuses in China and got to learn really terrible things about what have happened in China. The live organ harvesting. I know that again. I know the globalists are involved in some really bad stuff, and as you get into the harvesting of adrenochrome and these things, but if you look at China and what they've done, the CCP specifically, I genuinely believe they are evil incarnate. I think they are Satan incarnate on earth. If you look at a good source I know that has known people that were tortured in China, that one of the things that they were doing. So Zhang Zaman. So Zhang Zaman he's still alive. I'm not sure how. And there's still a major power struggle going on between him and Xi Jinping, which I'm going to get into as I talk about China's collapse. But Jiang Zemin was the key person that initiated the persecution of Falun Gong in China, right? There's 100 million or so of these people that practice this Falun Gong meditation practice. And Jiang Zemin, he's the one that started in 99 this persecution where basically all of them became criminals overnight. Now, I believe it's the most hidden genocide that's happening on earth right now. And that I think there's even millions that have been killed. But I've heard stories of some of the torture methods and some things they were doing under Zhang Zaman, especially one being that he was taking these practitioners and putting them into, as a way of torturing and killing, dropping them into giant cauldrons of boiling oil. Like, that was one of the ways that he was killing these people, was dumping them into giant cauldrons of boiling oil. And this is satanic, evil stuff happening in China. So China coming out and accusing Soros, who's one of the most prominent globalists that's highly involved in the UN and their policies, China coming out and calling him the son of Satan, it's very interesting. Like, to me, it shows there is definitely a massive divide coming, that's happening. Now, there's a lot of folks though that say, well, Seth, yeah, but the European bankers, they have all this control. And let's take a look at that, because if, let's just say, if China were to fall, what would happen? And we're going to dive into that. But you have to understand that even though the European bankers, the globalists have an immense amount of control, China has incredible control over the UN. They have control over the WHO. Tedros was basically plucked out of Ethiopia and put in control of the WHO by the Chinese Communist Party. And but you have to also look at some of the global things that show how much control China has, because although the globalists have been in control for a very long time, it doesn't mean that there can't be a Frankenstein's monster. That doesn't mean that one of their projects, China, communist China, it doesn't mean that it could have grown to be something they could no longer have control of and actually is a threat to them, right? Why do you think Soros is coming out and saying these things? Because Xi Jinping is a threat to the globalists. It's really important to understand that, right? So let's look at some of the control that China has, right? So one thing is, okay, what's happened with China trade around the world? Well, I'm going to show you a map. Okay, look at this. This is comparing the countries that are blue have more trade with the US than China. Countries that are red have more trade with China than the US. Look at what's happened since 2000. Tell me, if the US was, as I mentioned, one of the major tools of China and of the globalists, through look at the Rockefellers, all those different folks here, which I absolutely believe that they were. Look how much control that the US has lost to China. Look how many countries are now basically doing more business than China than the US. Almost all of them. Almost all of them except for Central America and Canada and a few other. Look at Europe, okay? There's a few European countries that are still more loyal to the US, but look at the control that China has. Look at Russia, look at Australia, look at Africa, look at South America. Okay, this should show you something. The globalists have something to fear. China, especially with its Belt and Road Initiative, China has a lot of financial power around the world, right? So the European bankers, they used to gain control over countries by going in. They had different ways of crashing their economies. Soros was very involved in that. And they would basically force these countries to come onto their central banking system. So China, though, has been doing their own thing with the Belt and Road Initiative. So China has been going into all these different countries and saying, look, we're growing. Sign up for our Belt and Road Initiative. We're going to basically give you a massive loan to build infrastructure to tie you into China. And so these countries become basically debt slaves to China. So even that move right there, it's not like they're becoming slaves to the UN or to the European bankers. It's China, right? So again, as I mentioned in the first video I did, the plot to steal America, all roads lead to China, and I absolutely believe that. So this is just looking at the financial system globally and the global trade with China. So, but let's take another look at what was Soros talking about. Why did Soros say that China was such a threat? It's technological power. Okay. So if you look at what's happening right now with the passports, okay, I have to be careful on YouTube, unfortunately, with the jab passports. The concern is that those will morph into being social credit score passports, right? There's that's a whole other episode I can get into. But if you've been paying attention, you'll see that the idea is that they can use these passports to be the beginning of a technocracy. Basically, it's a control, it's a tyranny via technology, right? So China has already mastered the art of this. China has close to 500 million cameras in its country, and it's growing every day. And they have their surveillance system in their country. It's, well, for one thing, you know what it's called? It's called Skynet. Okay, I'm not joking. Go look it up. So China's surveillance system is literally called Skynet. If you've seen Terminator, you know what happens there. Their surveillance is just insane in China that, listen, so, China has now a two child policy, right? Which, and it's constantly changing as they're evolving because they're running out of people, and they're freaking out about that. But basically, one of the parts of that policy is that you can have a second child if your first child isn't a son. Okay. Now, if what that would mean then, so say you already have a son and you fall pregnant, well, you're not allowed to have that child, basically. So China's surveillance system is so capable that they even use a system to track the menstrual cycles of women. And so their system, through the tracking when the woman buys tampons or other feminine care products, different things about social media, their system, they can track even when a woman falls pregnant, right? So I think I see that Crystal is up to 3 child now. They're having to expand their policy because they realize they don't have, they're running out of a populace, and the youth are becoming more useless because of the communist, principles. But so they can track. So let's just say you're a woman. This will be a couple of years ago, and you already have a son. You fall pregnant. They know that you're pregnant through their surveillance system. That woman might one day say she's 4 months pregnant. She's walking down the street. A van pulls up. She gets thrown in the back of a van. She gets taken to a hospital, given a forced abortion. Um, and I've studied this, unfortunately, a little bit heavily. And they give her an abortion. They put the fetus in a bucket. They put it at the base of her bed to make her live with that, to have that experience. And a lot of times they'll do late term abortions on women. It could be 7, 8 months. They don't care. So that is the level of their social credit system. That's the level of their surveillance. If you are sitting in a private home and you mention to a friend, I don't like, Xi Jinping's policy of this, you get docked. It means that maybe you can't buy groceries, you can't buy train tickets. So that's their system of social credit. And that is the biggest worry that people have with a passport system, because what happens how can they roll that out globally? So one thing that's very important about understand about Xi Jinping is Xi Jinping has ambitions to basically implement a global Marxist system. He's talked very openly about it. I was looking for the speech before the show, I couldn't find it, but he's spoken very openly about his goal to implement Marxism worldwide. Now, how would they do that? They would do it through technology. So why is Soros warning people about China's threat globally via their technology, right? Because their system. So again, people that say, well, the globalists are still in control. Let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this is this is China's Huawei and 5G. How do you think China is able to implement their surveillance, their police state in China? It's through their 5G network. Okay, so look at this map. Red are countries with confirmed that basically the 5G is run by China, whether it's through Huawei or other companies. Red it's run through China. Pink is that they are testing with Huawei. Okay, look at all of Europe. Look at all of South America. Look at Canada, right? They are moving in. Okay. So again, the people that are saying the globalists are in control, well, who controls this 5G system? This is China, right? This is exactly what George Soros was warning about. Now, this map has Australia as blue, which maybe Huawei has been in Australia, but I can certainly tell you that China has been making massive moves to take over China, take over Australia. I have family there, and I can tell you that it's frightening what they're doing with Australia. So I wouldn't consider Australia a non-China controlled country. So again, going back to that map, because this is so important, Basically, the United States is the only country that is free of China's 5G grid, or or in the process of, the pink countries. This is really, really, really serious. This is a very serious situation because that's China's control grid. Again, it's hard to look at this and say, yeah, you know what, that China became too powerful. That's exactly what's happened. This is why Soros is now coming there. I believe that the globalists are the most afraid of China. I believe they're the most afraid of Xi Jinping, and you can see the power that they have. Okay, it's incredible. Now that's just technology, but then you look into manufacturing. What is the biggest push of the globalists? It's the green agenda, climate change. Well, you have to realize that the majority of green technology is manufactured where? China. Okay, so not only is it manufactured in China, guess who controls 85% of rare earth metals? China. So here you go, South China Morning Post earlier this year. China's dominance of rare earth metal supply is a growing concern in the West. China provides more than 85% of the world's rare earth metals, and it is home to about two-thirds of the global supply of rare metals and minerals like antimony and bart, report says. The US and Europe are worried that any disruption to supply chains for such products would hurt key industries. All right. This is also really important to understand because as much as the globalists are pushing climate change and but the great reset and all these things, guess who's in charge of making the batteries? Guess who's in charge of making the windmills, the solar? It's China. Again, all this stuff goes back to China. Look at what happened with the lithium deposits in Afghanistan. Guess who benefits from that? China. So again, this is why I tell people that you got to focus on China and this. Don't get focused on these rabbit holes of like, well, Soros and the Clintons and these. And it's like, yeah, those are important. And I think there's a lot of bad people. But fundamentally, though, you have to be looking at what's happening with China. Now, this is frightening. Okay. I'll be the first to admit, looking at all this information is frightening because you realize, like, oh my gosh, it's like I see how China treats its citizens. I see how they do things that it's like whether you want to call them a communist country or a fascist or some sort of warped capitalism, it doesn't matter because they are brutal and their desire for power, they want to be the one tiger on the mountain. But I am actually very, very hopeful, which is kind of strange, right? But China is on the verge of collapse. The CCP is on the verge of collapse. I've got a few things I'm going to show you to show you exactly why I believe that. Um, and I'll talk about the ramifications if China falls at the end, but I want to show you just a few things here. So maybe you've heard about what's happening with Evergrande. All right, so Evergrande is a major banking institute. I think it's around 10 times the size of the of Lehman Brothers, which collapsed in the United States. So there are significant problems happening with China's economy. China, I believe, is truly on the verge of a financial collapse, which is also why I think we're seeing a lot of things that are very desperate. China is desperate, and I'll cover a few things. I'm going to cover China's financial system. I covered China's natural resources and the threat they have there to even feed their people. I'm going to cover the quit the CCP movement, which is a big, really important thing. And finally, I'm going to talk about the Three Gorges dams, the Three Gorges Dam, which kind of concludes the big piece of what happens with China. So let me pull up to show you this article. Okay, this is a very important article in the Epoch Times. China's debt crisis goes far beyond Evergrande. Okay, so the U.S. China trade war, along with the pandemic lockdowns, has slowed the economy. So it's really important to understand Trump caused major problems to China. They would not be nearly as weak as they are if it weren't for Trump. But he drove a knife into the ribs of China. So the in this article, the CCP hopes that increased internal demand will replace lost export revenue. This is unlikely given China's high savings rate, high unemployment, and an aging population. And as I mentioned before, the fact that they actually I'll pull this up this way so I'm not gonna, you can see me. So it's also the fact that they're younger Their youth, they're not working. That's how they're protesting communism. They're not working. They're not reproducing. So China has their population is dying off, right? So I'll read here. So to mitigate economic stagnation, the CCP has been using state-owned banks to funnel credit to the private sector and increasing domestic consumption. So basically, it's like the CCP is just throwing money into the economy to try to fix it. So what I'm saying is that along with increased loans has been an increase in defaults, right? What we saw happen in 2008 with the housing crisis. It's like, okay, we're going to give anybody a loan. If you want to buy a house, sure. Do you have a name? Okay, that's all we need. They were even giving loans out in dogs' names. It was ridiculous how easy they were passing out loans because well, there's a whole host of reasons. But this is what's happening in China, though. But what happens, though, is that you don't pay on those loans. You default on those loans. So, along with increased loans, has been an increase in defaults. By the end of 2020, Chinese banks were holding 466 billion in non-performing loans. So, Chinese banks are holding about $500 billion in non-performing loans. What's a non-performing loan? That means people have defaulted on their loans. They stop paying the loans. They're no longer performing, right? Okay, that's a lot of money, but they believe it's actually much more than that. So research conducted by academics from several universities in Singapore suggests that the NPL, non-performing loans, situation may be much worse than it appears, with banks concealing non-performing assets from regulators. As Chinese banks have been bundling NPLs and selling them off to investors, these researchers estimate that over 70% of NPL packages were resold at inflated prices. This is exactly what triggered the economic collapse in America, is that people were bundling these, I forget what you call them, not a financial guy, but bundling these packages of just basically trash loans and reselling those bundles and bundling again, reselling those things. It was like a giant Ponzi scheme. So the way the sales were structured, the NPLs were moved off the bank's balance sheets, but the banks remain exposed to the NPLs. It is estimated the real number of NPLs the banks are exposed to could be 2 to 4 times the reported figures. So basically, what these experts are saying is that Chinese banks are exposed to, they think, between $1 and $2 trillion in non-performing loans. You think the housing crisis was bad in America, right? $1 to $2 trillion in non-performing loans that the Chinese banks are stuck with. So talking about Evergrande. This is crazy to read about. So Evergrande, crumbling under 300 billion in liabilities, Evergrande has abandoned countless development projects across China, leaving 1.5 million buyers waiting for their homes to be finished. Evergrande is just the latest and highest profile developer to run out of money, but this problem has been going on for years. Recently, in the city of Kunming, 14 buildings were destroyed in a controlled demolition because the developers had run out of money 7 years ago. Okay, that's crazy. So Evergrande claims to have 1,300 projects in more than 280 cities. Ostensibly, these projects will be added to China's list of unfinished and abandoned developments. This is important, the company is the largest issuer of high yield dollar denominated bonds, many of which are coming due and it cannot afford to pay. This will send a ripple through an array of lending institutions, shaking the very foundations of the property industry. This is very important. Okay, the property industry, which accounts for about 27% of all loans and 29% of China's GDP. Real estate also represents 78% of the wealth of urban Chinese, meaning that if the sector collapses, it will take the economy, big developers, small investors, homeowners, and families with it. Okay, that is looming. That is on the verge of happening in China. One way that these developers build is they pre-sell a building. Okay, so it said that they had, I think it was 1.5 million homeowners that hadn't got their home yet. So the developer comes in, they say, we're going to build a building, we're going to have 400 units in Beijing. They pre-sell all those units. They then use that pre-sell money to use that as collateral to get more money from the bank, then build the property. What's happening is they're saying they had, I think, around 1,300 projects they had to stop. So 1,300 projects they can't finish. Do you think they have the money to give back to all those people that bought a home? No, they don't. So again, Evergrande is just the tip of the iceberg of a collapse in China. Now, that's just what's happening with the real estate market. Let's take a look now at what's happening with their famines and land, because I believe personally, I believe in God. If you watch this channel, you know that. And I believe that ultimately God is in control. And I believe that if you look at whether you're referencing the Bible or other texts, that the people that do evil are punished by the wrath of God. And I believe that China is being punished. Look at 2020. I'm gonna take a look at what happened in China in 2020, the same year, coincidentally, as the COVID virus being released, which I believe was an intentional biological attack by China. If you look at what China has done to the Uyghur Muslims, what they've done to their own population, as I mentioned with the abortions, what they've done with the Falun Gong, the forced organ harvesting, the underground Christians. It's like if there's one country on earth that God would be punishing, it would be China. So let's take a look at what's happening in China that's also causing them immense stress and pushing them to the brink of collapse. Coming famine China. Now, this was the article was written late last year, saying 2021 could be one of the deadliest years on record for China due to the worst food shortage in the last 50 years. The alarm was sounded earlier this year when a secret memo was leaked from party committee meeting. A secret government document dated March 28th leaked out of a party committee in Linsha Prefecture. An emergency meeting was called to make special arrangements because of food shortages. Okay, the state party committee, the government, counties, and cities must do everything possible to transfer and store all kinds of food, such as grain, beef, lamb, oil, and salt through various channels. 2020 has been an extremely difficult year for China. In January, China was hit with the coronavirus. The nation went into extreme lockdown, which I believe they caused that, but they still hit them hard. They had to lock down large cities like Wuhan, millions of people. Nations around the world began to rethink the supply chain as the US cranked up a trade war with China, because Trump was still here, and a mass exodus of businesses left China, leaving many factories empty and countless workers jobless. These events alone would have been enough to crush any economy, but then tragedy struck in the form of Mother Nature, or God, as I like to say. China has seen some of the worst plagues of diseases, earthquakes, storms, and even swarms of locusts destroy hundreds of millions of livestock and destroy millions of acres of farmland. Sounds like it's a biblical destruction happening in China. Now, the most populated nation has to figure out how to feed 1.5 billion people. So, again, for anyone that says, oh, God's not in control, look at what's happening. Right. So far we've established that China is the one that is to fear. China is the one that truly has control. If China falls, what happens? We're gonna get into that. But as you can see, China, as much as they're atheists, as much as they think that the Communist Party is above God, China is still under God. And if God wants to punish the Communist Party, they'll be punished, as you see happening. Locust plagues, droughts. There's even, I've seen rivers turning to blood in China. I'm serious. You search for it. Search for blood red rivers in China. There are entire river systems that have turned blood red in China. I mean, we like to think that the biblical things playing out would happen, say, in the Middle East or in America. We may not look to China, but China is still part of our earth. So is that what's happening in China? I believe that it is. So on the in addition to this, the Chinese people are rejecting communism. So this is something else I want to show you, which I've talked about before, but there is been a massive movement to encourage people to quit the Chinese Communist Party. So check this out. This is the Global Service Center for Quitting the Chinese Communist Party. So up until now, so what this company, this nonprofit does is they've become a resource, a central hub for anybody wanting to officially quit the Chinese Communist Party. So these are people that have seen through the propaganda, seen through the lies, and so far, 384 million Chinese have resigned, have quit the Chinese Communist Party. So this is critical because Chinese or communist nations thrive on the people being locked into their confusion. They thrive on maintaining a firewall of propaganda, the Great Chinese Firewall. So the fact that almost 400 million Chinese have publicly renounced the Chinese Communist Party, it also shows you that they don't have the support of the people. What's the big discussion that we're having right now as Americans? It's we the people, we the people. Okay, if we the people can throw off this government, we can take control. Right? Trump came in, said he's going to give the government back to we the people. So what happens when 400 million people in China and also outside of China that overseas have rejected and said we no longer are buying into this communist ideology. We want the Chinese Communist Party destroyed. That's a really important thing. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about before I go to conclusions is the Three Gorges Dam, right? So this is a big thing. So China has the largest dam in the world that is, as of last year, seeing major, major problems. Okay, so I'll read this quickly. This is written mid-year last year because there was some major flooding happening at that time. There's a serious concern that China's Three Gorges Dam may fail due to heavy flooding. If that fails, it would kill millions of people, perhaps 100 million, according to some claims, and displace even more. I'll change the view for you. Up to 100 million. If this dam breaks, which China claimed this dam was just the miracle on earth. It was almost like China's declaring they were in control of the earth, not God. And there's a lot of things that I can go into that. It's a whole different story. But the building of this dam, it was built out of spite for God. If you look into how it was done, they were saying, we're in control of earth. We can move mountains. So this dam, which is on the verge of failing, it almost failed last year from heavy flooding. Again, an act of God, heavy flooding. If the dam bursts, experts are saying that it could kill up to 100 million people in China. That's how massive this is. So they're saying it would arguably be the biggest non-pandemic disaster in history and have devastating second-order effects, including exacerbation of coronavirus, famine, nuclear radiation worse than Fukushima, further instability and great power dynamics, and global economic depression and collapse. It's no exaggeration to say that a sudden collapse of this dam could be the spark of cascading civilizational collapse, right? That's the reality. So again, this is what's happening in China. China truly is at the weakest place it's ever been. Now, and I say China, it's the CCP. Unfortunately, the poor Chinese people under the CCP, they are at the weakest place they've ever been. It's easy for us to feel like the globalists are in control of things. You look at what's happening, you say, okay, gosh, look at what happened to the House of Representatives. Look what bill they just passed. Look at Biden in the White House. We feel like we're losing from every angle sometimes. And you feel like that the globalists have all this control, that China has all this control. But we have to realize that China is like a flick away from collapsing. And it's not just like from one angle. There's also massive infighting in China. There's expectations of a coup happening in China, okay, within the Chinese Communist Party. And so what's going to happen, though? What happens to the globalists if China falls? You see how many power structures China has built. They've been going mad. You see the trade routes they developed around the world. You see the 5G, all the things that China has control over. If China collapses, they will bring down the New World Order with them. Because the only way that the New World Order can be implemented is through China's technology and through the things that China has set up, through the structures China has set up. If China collapses, what happens to Australia? What happens to America? How many of our politicians are bought off and owned by China and blackmailed by China? What's going to happen to them? Right? We know China, they're the master of honeypotting and blackmail and bribery. So again, if China falls, it will bring down the New World Order. They will not be able to recover. And China is teetering so much. So I don't want to tell people, okay, just sit back and have hope that China will fall. Like, okay, no, but what I'm telling you is that everything that we're doing, they want us to think that we're weak. They want us to think that they're in control. They want to use their media mouthpieces and Biden in the White House to make us think that we're losing. But actually, our enemy is so weak. It's so weak. And the more we stand up together as patriots around the world, the more we reject the mandates, the more we reject their system, the more we reject it and we do not buy into this, they're falling. And what's also really important is that why have 400 million Chinese quit the Communist Party? Because people in China took it upon themselves to spread true information about communism, true information about their persecutions, true information about the history of China, right? The people took it upon themselves, and that's how they've initiated that change. And so what's really important is that here in America, especially, they've tried so hard to divide us into left versus right, black versus white, etc. Don't talk about Trump. Don't talk about Biden. Say, look, China is the enemy of us. Research China, get more information about China. Show your friends that are liberals, show them, say, look, this is our enemy. Look what China does to its own people. They're trying to come here. Like the few conversations I've had with family that weren't in support of Trump, I didn't talk about Trump. I said, look, Trump was just trying to fend off China. Like, let's look at China. And then they realize, like, oh my gosh, if China's really doing that, and if Trump was trying to protect us from China, it's like, gosh, maybe I should have voted for Trump. See, that becomes the key. Exposing communism, especially exposing China, is what unlocks people's thinking. It's not about getting into the left versus right. Look at what's happening in New York City with BLM and the mandates there. Now you have Trump supporters and BLM marching together to oppose the mandates in New York City. It's crazy how when you identify a common enemy, even your enemies can become your friends. And that's what we have to do as people around the world. We have to be able to unite ourselves. We have to be able to unite, talk to our neighbors and say, look, I know that you voted for Biden. That doesn't matter. Like, we have to look at what's happening with China and figure out how we can oppose China and expose China. And of course, the globalists come along with them. I'm not saying they're innocent and you forget about them. We have to fight against them as well, but we have to reclaim our country from the ground up. So I'm now going to be jumping over to Rise TV. I'll give you a few minutes. So a quick little background, as I mentioned about Rise TV, it's a Patriot-owned streaming platform. I'm one of those patriots that has ownership in it. Some good friends of mine. Our goal is to basically build something that will become the righteous replacement for Netflix. We're at the earlier stages, so that for folks that want to support me, like, I'm going to continue doing as much free content as possible. My mission is to reach as many people as possible. But I've got a house, I've got a baby, I have to work. So I have to find some way of doing it. So Rise TV is what has now allowed me to do this full time. So if you want to support, you can sign up over there. It's $10 a month. If you want to come over and just check it out, there's a free trial link in the description below. So you can go in there. It's completely uncensored. I think you'll like it. So I'll be going over there in a few minutes. Just want to give you that heads up that if you haven't done that, you want to sign up, you can do that now. So just to conclude this episode, I hope this was useful for you. I hope that this was educational for you. And I hope that it gave you some perspective on what's happening. Because again, everything we're seeing happening in our country, it feels like loss after loss after loss. Look at the border, look at the audits, look at this. It's like, okay, come on, how much can we take? But I think that the enemy behind what's happening in our country is breathing its last breath. And if that enemy falls, we will quickly see our country change very, very rapidly. I guarantee you that. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be still hardship ahead of us. But again, this is what gives me hope. And I believe that fundamentally, if you look at why, you look at the reasons why China is very close to falling, to me, it's God. It's not because of some Soros thing. It's not because of something else. China is on the verge of falling because they have sided with Satan. They've waged a war on God. They've killed people of faith in their own country. They've slaughtered their population. And they are now going to be having heaven's wrath. And you see it happening. So again, no person, no country, no nation, no billionaire, no trillionaire is outside of the control of God. And China is experiencing that. So again, this is why it's important for us to keep our faith strong, keep our prayers up, and just know that there are plans. And a lot of times, when you're in a foxhole, worrying about how you're going to survive, you may not know what God's plan is. But maybe, say you're in World War II and your enemy's going to be kind of fight. You're convinced they're going to kill you, but maybe lightning strikes their general and they say it's, oh my gosh, it's the sign of God, right? These things can happen. Like, that's what faith is. Even when it looks very, very dark, there's still so many reasons for us to have faith because God works in mysterious ways. And it's not like, oh, well, if you put Trump back in office, I'll have faith. That's not how it works. It's like, I'm going to keep fighting and keep doing the best I can. I'm going to be working on exterminating evil around me and inside of me, and God will work in his way as well. So, all right, so I'm going to hop over to Rise TV now. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you over there. If not, I understand, and I'll keep seeing you on YouTube and Facebook and the like. So let me hop back over. Just take me a second here to end the stream. So bye-bye, everybody that's not over there. Thank you so much. All right. Take care of that.